Good afternoon. My name is Connor Hutcherson. I'll be presenting on behalf of Pall Corporation Food and Beverage. Today we'll be discussing a budding industry, how filtration solutions can help with cannabis extraction. A bit more about the presenter. My name is Connor Hutcherson. My background was chemistry. I studied at CSU Chico, and I focused on inorganic solid-state materials. I joined Pall Corporation in 2017 as a field application scientist, and I've been in this role for about 3 years. I am a member of our SLS Global Technical Support Group, SLS being Scientific and Laboratory Services. The best way of explaining this role is where customer support meets process consulting. So working with customers to ensure that our solutions are being implemented properly in alleviating pain points observed during their manufacturing process. Here's a question that I want you to think about throughout this presentation. A filter is a filter, right? It's common that I'll be speaking with customers, and they have this assumption that the filters used for this specific application are no different than the common coffee filters you may be using every morning. Throughout this presentation, our aim is to try to answer and show how this way of thinking really isn't correct. Some detail about Pall Corporation. It's a rather old company founded in 1946 by Dr. Pall, who was a true innovator of his time. We are a global provider of filtration and separation sciences. We have more than 10,000 employees, and more important than the number of employees is the fact that many employees of Pall Corporation have worked directly in the industries that we are serving. One key differentiator is the solution and application knowledge in all process steps. So having the end-to-end process knowledge, not just focused on filtration, but rather how filtration can alleviate pain points all throughout your manufacturing process. In this case, it would be from biomass to finished consumer packaged good. And this isn't something we only do for the cannabis market. We have a very deep process knowledge of things like beer, wine, spirits, proteins, flavors. Essentially, if you can filter it, we have some experience with it. Here's the cannabis oil extraction process flow. You'll notice that this is primarily based on the ethanol workflow. We do have experience with several other extraction technologies, things like CO2, olive oil, and some other different solvents. Starting with the biomass that then goes through the extraction process. After the extraction process, you're going to have a crude oil. As you guys know, typically with an ethanol-based process, you are going to be picking up chlorophyll. Obviously, you'll get less of this if you're doing it at a cryo temperature. The next step is clarification. Now, this specific part of the process is only removing the hard particulates. So ideally, you will go through a winterization process to precipitate out any of those waxes and removing things like the fats, waxes, carbohydrates, but also the physical plant particles that may be left over from the extraction process. We mentioned earlier that you will be picking up color agents such as chlorophyll, pigments, carotenoids during the extraction process. So we have worked towards a color removal or color reduction solution. Many of you may be using things like powdered activated carbon or other filter additives, and I'm sure you found that they're not the easiest to work with. So here we have our AKS filters, our activated carbon sheets, where we have immobilized activated carbon in a cellulose matrix. After the activated carbon, we then go to a solvent recovery step. As you guys know, this is just stripping any of the solvent that may have been used in the extraction process. After this, we move to the crude oil distillate, which, as you know, typically goes through a molecular distillation process to get that product ready for consumers. We found that certain customers choose to take it a step further and actually dilute their finished product with a carrier oil, things like MCT, flax, sunflower oil. Those customers sometimes will choose to put that diluted product through a microbial stabilizing filter. And the function of this is to remove any yeast or bacteria that may have picked up during the extraction process. That product can then be further refined into an isolate, or it can go directly into formulation and get ready to be turned into the CPG. One point that I want to make here is that going back to from biomass to finished oil, working with the entire process, what we found is that a value add of implementing an optimized filtration solution is you can actually alleviate pain points during your distillation step. I'm sure if any of you guys on this call are the ones actually operating the distillation apparatus, you found you spend quite a lot of time trying to fix and clean the gunk in the pumps. Obviously, if you were to take proper filtration measures in front of that, you can mitigate a lot of the carbonized looking material that makes it to the distillation step. So a nice hidden value add that we found for this process. There are several weaknesses in current filtration methods and providers, and a lot of these were some obvious and some were a bit more surprising as you work in depth in the industry. One thing that we found working with many customers is the lack of on-site support. So one thing that we worked really hard to do is get in on the manufacturing floor with customers, learn what specific problems that we're trying to solve, and place our technologies to solve that specific problem. You know, it's very important to me specifically that we implement a solution, not create a problem. Obviously, during COVID, it's been challenging to have on-site support. So moving towards more of a virtual assistant or way helping with your filtration questions, being available to answer questions as they come up. We've leveraged things like Microsoft Teams, Zoom, FaceTime to actually see what is happening at your manufacturing facility and work towards a root cause and solution. Something else that you'll find is that certain filtration technologies can be quite labor intensive. So, you know, obviously if you've done anything with a Buchner funnel, you know that does take quite a lot of time. If you've been working with a sheet press, you also know that there's quite a lot of time associated with changing the sheet. Also, it can be human error prone. There's certain things that the operators could do that leads to an inconsistent product, leading to it needing to be filtered a second time, ultimately increasing the total time of filtration. One other point that I like to note is that we've seen many open air systems, so something like a Platinum frame or a Buchner funnel, where you can have these vapors getting into the atmosphere. Something else is that many solutions are not inline and they're not scalable. Obviously, if you look to something like a Buchner funnel, that's not going to be inline, and it's really challenging to scale efficiently. Looking at something like a Platinum frame, where you really have a fixed system, you may have an order coming in for 200 gallons one month. The next month, you have a 2,000 gallon order. And are you capable of handling that increase in demand with the housing you already have? Is it capable to scale with you? Something else that we alluded to earlier is inconsistent filtrate quality. This is especially important if you're using something like a Buchner funnel. How are you making sure that you're having a consistent product quality every time? There's also several challenges that will be observed with the oil extraction process. Certain complexities that you're going to see. So really, if you look at what we're filtering out, you can break it into two different subcategories. You have the physical particulate, things like the carbohydrates, the fats, and the waxes. And then you have the color adding compounds, things like chlorophyll, pigments, and the carotenoids. So what we've done is work together to design solutions for these two different subcategories. And so what we've found worked really well are our sheet media. A bit more about the sheet media, specifically focused on the clarification aspect. There's really two main products that we've been using. And if you were to look at the image at the top right, you can see the SUPRA pack and the SUPRA disc. The image here is of our SUPRA pack. There's several key advantages of these technologies relative to other things that you may be using for filtration. One thing that's really important is it's a relatively tiny footprint that allows for a very easy inline integration. The tiny footprint being, you can see these filter housings are vertically stacked rather than horizontal. So it's really vertical headspace that it's taking up, minimizing its overall footprint during in your manufacturing facility. Another point that I like to make here is that it is scalable. So what you can do is essentially double, triple, quadruple the filter area at your disposal simply by stacking the modules on top of one another. We also like to make the point that there are several different grades for process optimization, and we'll focus on the process optimization in a later slide, but I want to talk about the different grades. So what we've done is essentially these filters are a cellulose matrix where we have immobilized different filter additives. Now, by tweaking the ratios of these filter additives, you can actually get different clarities at specific pore sizes. What this opens up is that if you have a product that's going to be varying, so maybe one day you have a CBD dominant strain, the next day a THC dominant strain, that CBD dominant strain may have more waxes. So you actually want to use a coarser filter grade, something that's capable of handling that increase of wax without dramatically affecting the overall clarity and throughput that you'll see. The next thing I want to talk about is our color removal. So you may have found customers that are using powdered activated carbon, different filter additives to accomplish the color removal. It's not always the easiest process, especially when you're working with powdered activated carbon. It can be quite messy, very humbling to work with. Something else that we found with different additives that are used for color removal is it actually starts to change the pH and it starts to tweak the chemistry of the extract. And so you may be seeing, the infamous green or pink distillate and trying to think about what might be the root cause of that and how is that impacting the overall potency of that product. So what you can see here is the image on the bottom right. These are our SUPRA disc AKS series, and the top left specifically is the SUPRA disc. These AKS sheets are also made in sheets that can be integrated into an existing plate and frame. And so what we've done is not too different from the clarification that it's powdered activating carbon that's been immobilized in the cellulose matrix. Now there are several different grades that serve different functions. So you may have the specific function of odor removal, something like a product that may be getting integrated into an edible SKU, versus something like for a vape cartridge where it's really the clarity of the product. And so having different carbons to solve different specific problems. One other point that I like to make here is that these filters do come in two different sizes. We have our 12-inch format yielding 1.8 square meters of surface area and our 16-inch format yielding 5 meters squared. So the ability to make sure that we're not oversizing and not undersizing for your specific process. The image that you may be seeing in the middle, you may think that this actually went through a carbon step. It was actually just gone through one of our polishing filters. So you can see the extent of particulate reduction and how that affects the overall clarity of your product. We've talked a lot about the different types of technologies, but we really haven't emphasized or discussed how we accomplish this. So I want to focus on the image below. We started with our traditional sheet filters, which then moved to our SD1 style lenticular. This then evolved to what we now use as our SUPRA Disc 2, which then evolved to the gold standard SUPRA Pack. A bit of information about the SUPRA Pack. Essentially what we've done throughout this evolution process is tweak the path of least resistance and engineer it in such a way that we're maximizing the contact time with the filter. This has been especially important in the cannabis market where we're working with these amorphous, waxy type solids. Once again, we're using different ratios of filter additives that result in different removal efficiencies. And what we found is that it's the weak intermolecular forces between the filter additives that are immobilized in the cellulose matrix and the waxes that allows for a clear, bright, consistent product. You may be asking the question, well, why would someone choose to use the SUPRA Pack versus the SUPRA Disc or the SUPRA Disc versus the SUPRA Pack? And it's a great question. Focusing first with the SUPRA pack. If you were to zoom in on this photo, you would see that there are very precise holes that have been cut into the sheets. Once again, how we're able to control the path of least resistance through this filter. Now, if you're working with a high solid application, if you are to blind these different pores, that will result in a very low flow rate. And of course, during the manufacturing process, you want to have a flow rate that is economical for the entire process. So it's not leading or turning into a bottleneck. For the SUPRA disc, if you were to look past the polypropylene shell, you would see that they're essentially these filter paper that are stacked on top of each other. And what this allows for is a greater dirt holding capacity. So it allows for a filter cake to be formed. This filter cake actually does assist with the overall filtration. But to summarize, if you're working with a high solids application, something like a CO2 process, I would suggest using something like a SUPRA disc. If you're using an ethanol-based process that has a relatively low solid load, the SUPRA pack would be great. We've talked a bit about an optimization process. And so how do you go through that with filters? Do you have to invest, have a large capital investment in getting all of the housings? The answer is no. Actually, what we've done is we leverage our SUPRA caps. And what this is a 22 centimeter squared filter, so very small. It has a polypropylene housing. And what you can do is actually just use something like a syringe or a peristaltic pump to drive the product through that filter. One thing that's very valuable about these is that it's the same media that is used in a larger SUPRA disc and SUPRA pack. And you may have the question, well, is it possible to do this with the activated carbon? And the answer is yes. So we have our clarification focus sheets, as well as our activated carbon sheets in this AKS format. Now, it doesn't give too much insight into the expected or anticipated throughput. However, what it does a great job of doing is allowing us to understand the filtrate quality after the filtration process. So what grade ultimately would you like to use and move forward with? Several different benefits of Pall housing. We've alluded to several of these. Really the biggest one is the ability to grow with you. So using the same housing base, it's really just the dome in the center post that limits how many filters you can use at once. So there is the ability to vertically stack several filters atop one another. One thing when it comes to filtration is it's ultimately the surface area that will define the efficiency of the filtration process. So having the ability to double, triple, quadruple the filter area is really beneficial, especially for people that are doing toll processing. And you may have one customer that's only doing 20 gallons, and you may have another customer that's doing 200, 2,000 gallons. How are you going to be able to accommodate that large swing in flow rates? We do offer explosion-proof housings. As we know, that has been an important point, and the industry is starting to expect that from its filtration suppliers. Here we have a slide really emphasizing one thing: customers talk and we listen. Although we have a deep understanding of the CO2 ethanol workflow, there's going to be these other kind of one-off extraction methods. So here we actually had a customer that was using, I believe it was sunflower oil for the extraction process. What we did is work closely with the customer, get into their facility, trial several different filters, and see what resulted in the best clarity and ultimately was most aligned with the customer's expected end product. One thing that I want to emphasize here is that we were capable of processing, in this case, 235 liters in just 13 minutes. So for most producers, there's a dramatic decrease in overall filtration time after integrating really an optimized filtration solution. You can see from the photo at the top, it really came as this quite nasty product, and over time it was resulted in a bright, beautiful product that was ready for consumers. Hopefully through this presentation, you've been able to identify that Pall Corporation really puts a precedence on customer support. It's one thing that was a bit surprising when I started to work in the industry was how apprehensive many of the competitors were to get in and learn the process and really focus on specific problems, but work with the customers to solve their specific problem. Once again, my role within SLS, or Scientific and Laboratory Services, is to get on the phone with customers, get in front of a customer, have those conversations, understand their specific problem, work towards a root cause and a solution. So there are several key functions that this role performs. One is process monitoring and optimization. So being able to coach and guide a customer as to how to optimize their filtration process. We do have a lab in Port Washington, New York, where samples can be taken in and analyzed to make sure that we are proposing the best solution for your specific product. Something else that it's quite fun for me are plant surveys. So actually getting to work with customers, going to their facility, walking the manufacturing line. And what's really interesting is how much hidden value can be found during these plant surveys. Maybe something like providing sterile air for a CO2 line, or how are you confirming sterile air for a packaging line? Things that are always kind of an afterthought for producers. Being able to bring our deep product knowledge, leveraging knowledge from other industries, and using that for a cannabis manufacturing facility. One other thing that I mentioned that is capable in our lab are product studies. So really digging in to your specific product, understanding how we can put our best foot forward and provide you the best solution. One other thing it's kind of integrated in with the plant survey. Also, given COVID, a lot of it's been done virtually, but best practice training. So, I think the worst thing you can do is say that, oh, this is a turnkey solution where you won't need any help in operating this. The reality is that for many people, filtration is an afterthought, and hopefully we'll work towards solving that problem. But, working with customers, coaching and guiding them how to best use our products to make sure that they're being implemented properly. Once again, emphasizing the point, my goal is to provide a solution, not to create a problem. You guys have so many other things that you need to be focusing on, and just having the ability to call a filtration expert and get your questions answered in a timely manner. Here we have a slide, quality assured, quality delivered. It's really our guiding principle. So we want to make sure that when you use a product for the first time, it's the same as if you were to continue using it, making sure that the quality is going to be assured for a consistent product quality that your consumers have began to expect. Something else that we pride ourselves on is our declarations of compliance. Being able to work with you in terms of different certifications that you may need, regulatory statements. Obviously, as this industry is constantly changing, it's been very dynamic from a regulatory standpoint, but being able to work with customers to make sure that we are providing a solution that can be implemented and integrated safely into your process. Quality compliance is something else that's been very important for us. Once again, I just want to state, as it is a constantly evolving industry, and that different compliance expectations come for different countries, and even at a state-to-state level, there may be different compliance requirements. So being able to work with customers, learn what specifics they need, and on our end, being able to provide solutions that you can safely implement and use. What I want to focus on as we wrap up this webinar are several considerations when assessing your current filtration processes. So I've been on the phone with several hundred different customers at this point, and this is really the most common questions that I like to ask these customers. What is your current filter spend in dollars a gallon? How much are you currently spending on filtration? Don't forget to take in the time associated with that process. What's the value add by minimizing the time of filtration? What are your anticipated daily throughputs in gallons? Once again, our filters come in several different sizes, and there really is a Goldilocks zone for filtration. I want to make sure that we're not undersizing your specific process, which could lead to constant filter changeouts, which can be a bit of a pain if you're in the middle of a run and you have to swap out a filter. But the flip of that would be not oversizing. Obviously, if you oversize, it is a cellulose-based filter, so there is some absorption that will occur. So I want to make sure that you're not losing any unnecessary product. How long does your current filtration process take for 1 gallon of product? This is really just to understand the total time of filtration. Something else that I'd like to emphasize is, are you currently requiring several passes? I really hope not. We have technologies that allows, even for a CO2 process, a single pass, not having to take the time to re-winterize and re-chill your product. How are you confirming shelf stability? Maybe this isn't something that you've been forced to focus on, but if you had a customer that came to you and said, how are you confirming shelf stability? How are you making these claims? Curious as to how you would answer that, keeping in mind we do have membrane technology that can help answer this specific question. Are there any steps in your upstream process that may result in lower than expected throughputs or long filtration times? So if you think back to the workflow, the different extraction parameters that you're using ultimately will dictate the amount of solids that will be seen by the filter. If you're using something like a screw press or an extruder that's exerting these shearing forces on your product, it's likely that you're going to see more plant material relative to someone that's using something like a centrifuge to get the rest of the product out. And so here we go, focusing back on this question. A filter is a filter, right? So although the focus and function of a filter is to filter out particulate, or in certain cases, color, there are different filtration technologies that can alleviate several pain points and burdens that you may be observing in your manufacturing facility. So it's a bit more dynamic than you might have initially thought. And I'll say this, after implementing and integrating an optimized solution that is best fit for your current volumes, you'll start to see so many pain points start to diminish and minimize. It's really been fun for me getting to work in this industry and help pave the way towards what was an afterthought. So many people don't focus on filtration and they don't see the value that it can bring. Lastly, we want to work with you. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out. Hopefully you can see from this, I really enjoy getting on the phone with customers, learning their process, and placing our technologies to solve your problems. If you're interested in learning more, please send an email to foodandbeverage@pall.com. We look forward to your questions. We're also offering a 30-minute consultation, which can be found at pall.com/cannabis. I look forward to speaking with you soon, and thank you for your time.